Thank you, thank you. We are honored in this place. There's no place I would rather be here than here on a Sunday morning with you guys. And I love this house, love this church, and I love to call it home. I am continually thankful for everything that everyone has gone before and has laid a foundation. Thank you for my mom and my dad who have so graciously continued to love and serve Jesus in this place. And we have a great history and we have a great future, don't we? And so thank you guys for honoring us. We appreciate you guys. And I'm looking forward to preaching the Word of God this morning. We just finished a series on the parables, and we're coming into a new series called The Gospels. We are centering in, really, this next season in the Gospels, which is the first 4 books of the New Testament. And so we're going to jump in here, and we're going to enjoy it. It's interesting is that the Lord, not the Lord, but as he orchestrated it, when you look at the Bible, it's set in 2 sections. You have the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you're looking at it, in the Old Testament, the first 5 books are called the Pentateuch, or it's called the Law or the Torah, and it really sets up the rest of the Old Testament. You have to read the first 5 books in order to understand the remainder of the Old Testament. And the New Testament set up in the exact same way, where the first 4 books are called the Gospels. It's 4 stories from 4 separate people, all about the life of Jesus, his birth, his death, and his resurrection. And that you have to read the first 4 books in order to understand the rest of the New Testament. So if you were going to chance Bible in a year, or maybe you're going to try and get ahead of your Bible in a year, and you're going to do that, my encouragement is read the first 5 books of the Old Testament, first 4 books of the New Testament. That will set the course and the pace for everything else that comes. Everything fits into those timelines and fits into the narrative. And so what we're doing right now is we're walking into a gospel series. I'm actually looking forward to it next week. Travis Arnold, who's a professor at Portland Bible College, is going to be here, and he's going to be preaching a gospel narrative. He's going to be answering the question, from a gospel overview perspective, why 4 stories on the same Jesus? Why 4 different characters to say the same thing? Why not just one? And so he's going to give us an overview from a bird's eye view or a 30,000-foot view on the gospel narrative. And so I love this. I love the Gospels. I love the stories of Jesus. And what we find even in the last series on parables is that when you start to drill down and read it, there's some beautiful depth and richness and meaning in God's word. And so I love centering around it, and I love where we're going to be today. Today we're going to be talking about a quiet place in Mark chapter 6 is where we're going to be focusing today. But the first question I have for you is a really serious question. How many of you guys have ever been in a dog pile? I know it's a serious question. How many of you guys have never been in a dog pile? There's got to be people who have avoided a dog pile. No one? One's okay. Really? There's some. So how many of you have no clue what a dog pile is? That's okay. There we go. Start there. Don't worry, I'm not going to start one. Dog pile is when somebody falls down or trips, and a good friend of theirs decides to yell the word dog pile, and everybody jumps on top of them. Then what you end up being at the bottom of this thing with hundreds of people on top of you, and you cannot breathe. In fact, it's a very scary place. And so just make sure that you never find yourself in that place. If you have been in a dog pile, they're terrifying, aren't they? Nobody wants to be at the bottom. In fact, what you find is that it's never the person at the bottom who yelled dog pile. I've yet to meet someone who's like, dog pile, and starts it. That's not how it works. It's how we take advantage of people. It's the moment that you fall or trip and a friend looks at you and says, you're my friend, I'm going to help you. Instead of helping you up, they yell, dog pile. And all your other friends jump on top of you. If you've ever been in a dog pile or at the bottom of the dog pile, you know that it's a very lonely and quiet place where you're struggling to breathe and you're holding on for dear life. Obviously, this is coming out of a deep emotional wound, you can tell. I've been at a few dog piles, and I avoid now tripping and hanging out with friends who yell dog pile. So it's also interesting that in life is that way, is that the moment you get kicked down, you want something to happen in life that says, here, let me help you back up. But quite often, the moment you trip up, you fall, something happens, you lose something, it's almost as if life turns around and yells, dog pile. Doesn't it? It's like all of a sudden one bad thing happens, and then another bad thing, and another bad thing. And we find ourselves sometimes in these seasons where it's like, you can't catch a break. You can't figure it out. Nothing's working. We all know the saying, right? It rains. When it rains, it pours over and over. And then they say, please don't add insult to injury. Over and over again, it seems like when you're at the bottom of the dog pile, everything just keeps happening and happening and happening. And we find ourselves in these crazy places. Several years ago, I was actually working on my Jeep. I had this really nice Jeep Wrangler that I loved very, very much. And I was working on it in my yard. And a friend came over and stopped and was talking to me. He was outside the Jeep. I was inside the Jeep. And I accidentally kicked the shifter, and it went into neutral, and then it rolled down my driveway. And as I look up, I'm rolling down the driveway, and my friend is standing there watching me. And I'm thinking, oh, no. And I rolled all the way down the driveway, and I smashed right into his really nice, expensive truck. We're not going to name this friend today. I remember I looked at him in like shock and horror, like, I'm so sorry, And he looked at me, and his response was beautiful. He said, hey, it doesn't matter. He says, they're going to repo it next week anyway. So, at that point, he was the one in the dog pile, Anyway, they did repo the truck, and I actually used to enjoy watching it drive around town because somebody else bought it, and I recognized the dent on it. It was a perfect match to my wonderful Jeep Wrangler. The reality is that when we find ourselves in the seasons of life, that it's almost as life won't give up. It's like one thing bad happens to the next thing bad happens. It's like you can't find a moment of peace. You can't find a moment of quiet. The moment you start building health, your health drops again. The moment that you think that you're doing okay, you wake up the next morning and you're thinking, I'm not doing okay. And we go through these seasons in life that we feel like the world is just dogpiling us. And you're at the bottom of this thing, smashed to the ground. And when you're down there, smashed to the ground, it can be a really lonely and a quiet place. And there, you're usually smashed by grief, by loss. Usually it's hope deferred. It's like one of those sucker punches. It's rejection, it's fear, it's tiredness, it's physical pain, it's sadness. And it seems like we can go through seasons where one sucker punch leads to the next sucker punch, to the next sucker punch. I don't know if you've ever been there. Anyone else? Or am I the only one who's got emotional pain here today? The reality is we all find ourselves there. And if you haven't found yourselves there, consider yourself lucky. You're about ready to find out what all the adults are going through. We consistently find ourselves, not all the time, but every once in a while we find ourselves at the bottom of that dog pile. And as much as I want to say, oh, the dog pile has so much meaning and it's just so wonderful and rich, the reality is that at the bottom of the dog pile, it's a very quiet place, and you can have plenty of time to reassess your life choices. You have plenty of time to reassess your friends, of course, thinking to yourself, I hate these people, and reassess your almost mistakes. The reason I say this is each and every one of us has probably been at the bottom of this dog pile. This is where we start Mark chapter 6. This is how Jesus is feeling. And if you look at what's going on in the story line, Jesus goes into his hometown. He's rejected deeply by all of his friends. In fact, he started performing miracles, and people started believing. Everything was going really, really well. And then somebody decided, hey, we know this guy. Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this the one? Don't we know their brothers and their sisters? And they actually convinced themselves to go from he is God to a place of he's just a person. And in fact, what happened was that when he was there at Nazareth, his hometown, it was rejected. He turned around and he said, listen, I'm rejected in my own town. And he actually turns around and he said, the Bible says that he was amazed at their unbelief. And so he leaves his hometown completely rejected. This is in his second year of ministry. You can only anticipate him wanting to go home and share with his friends all that God's doing, all that he's doing, all that's happening, and everything that's taking place. Yet he comes in with hope, and he leaves shattered and broken. As much as we want to say, oh, Jesus was, he was God, he could have figured it out and got over it. No, he was also real human. And he had emotions, and he had feelings, and for him, starts out with this total dog pile. And so you find that the story of Mark chapter 6 is that Jesus walks out rejected. And in fact, the next thing he does is he tells all of his disciples, he tells the 12 disciples, I'm going to send you guys out on a ministry trip. You guys are going to go minister in individual villages. You're going to preach. You're going to cast out demons. You're going to do all this kind of stuff. And what does Jesus do? He steps back into the darkness, into the alone time, and you can tell that he's in a place of like, I need help. I need a moment to be able to connect with my Father. I need a moment to find quietness. He didn't want to go to a crowd. He sent everybody else to a crowd. I don't know if you've ever avoided a party so that you could be alone. I have. And every time I do, my wife outs me. So love you for that. She always tells me, if you send me alone, I'm going to tell him why you're not there. So marry well, everyone. Marry well. They're going to help you along the way. And the reality is that Jesus is feeling this. He's emotionally distraught. He's frustrated. He's probably rejected. He's feeling lost. So he sends the 12 away, and he's searching for a quiet place. I don't know about you, but aren't you trying to find a quiet place sometimes? Just the quietness in the moment. Like there's something in our heart that draws us to that. And Jesus' heart was drawn to a quiet place. So he sends them all out. While he's in that quiet place, someone else jumps on top of it. And this is where you read the story of John the Baptist, where Herod goes out, he finds John the Baptist, he arrests him, brings him back, and then the whole story of John the Baptist where they choose to behead him. John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin. He was his lifelong ministry buddy. They'd known each other from birth. They were tight like the night, like they knew each other, loved each other. So not only is he rejected by his own town, while he's trying to rest, while he's trying to find quiet, he gets the news that his best friend hasn't just like randomly died, no, has been beheaded. Like fear and trembling and pain. And what you find is that he's trying to process this emotion, and then the disciples come back in excitement, and they want to report back all that has happened. So we jump right into this. Mark chapter 6:30. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour, nice big tour, European tour, first time, good job. And they told him all that he had done. You can only imagine how excited they are. Yet Jesus' response was this: let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest for a while. You're thinking, no, we're building momentum. This is working. Like it's interesting to see that the disciples are excited about what's happening, and Jesus is in a place of like, hey, let's get away. Let's be quiet. It's interesting to me because this isn't the response that you would probably expect Jesus to have in this moment unless you understand where he's coming from. Because what you would expect for him is like, you guys did a great job, and like to celebrate with them, be excited with them. This is amazing. I want to hear every single story. But there's something going on in Jesus' life where he's just been rejected and went through loss, and then he just lost a really good friend, and he's actually trying to find a quiet place. He's trying to rest his soul. He's trying to get to a place of like, how do I process all of what I'm feeling and all the grief that I'm going through? Yet someone in your life is like, let me tell you about my new job. Let me tell you about my new girlfriend. Let me tell you about what happened to my life. And I don't know if you have any of those friends where you're sitting here like, you're missing the point. I'm broken. I'm hurting. And I know you're excited about everything that's happening in your life, but I'm struggling to get there with you. This is where we see a little glimpse of the humanity of Jesus, not the divinity. And his humanity's broken. His humanity's sitting here going, I need time. And in fact, it says that he said, let's go away by ourselves to a quiet place and rest for a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. There's crowds picking up. Obviously, people had followed the disciples. And he's in this place where it's almost as if he's trying to find a quiet moment to process, yet his disciples are excited, not matching his tone, and all of a sudden people are showing up, and Jesus finds himself in a place where he wants to go to a quiet place. He finds himself in a quiet place, and then his quiet place keeps getting ruined. If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. The moment you find quiet is the moment that it's completely ripped and stolen from you, isn't it? So there's this moment in Jesus' life and history where he's like, I've got to get out of here. I've got to fix this. I've got to do this. In fact, the word quiet place is really interesting because when Jesus quotes this, let's get to a quiet place, the word is actually translated from what we know as the word wilderness or desert. He's literally like, let's go to an unpopulated, uncultivated, solitary place. You ever felt like that? You just want to run away from life, run away from your home, run away from your job. Like, I just want to leave and see if anyone can find me. One of my dreams in life is to see how far away I can get in like a 2-week period on the earth, you know? Because nobody can probably find me. That's one of my dreams. So if you can't find me, I'm fulfilling one of my lifelong dreams. Running away. That's what it is. Looking for a solitary place, a quiet place. And this is what's going on in Jesus' life. In fact, he's tired. He needs refresh. And there's something, it's interesting to me that when life is chaotic, when life is emotional, when life is overwhelming, there's something in us that like wants to go to a quiet place. It wants to find, I'm an extreme extrovert. But there are moments when I just want to be alone. Isn't that weird? I have a hard time figuring that one out. But there's something about a quiet place that draws us. So this is what happens. Jesus is telling them, let's go to a quiet place. And then his quiet place is ruined. Verse 32 says this, so they left the boat for a quiet place where they could all be alone. But many people recognizing them saw them leaving, and the people from many towns ran ahead along the shore, and they got there ahead of them. Jesus saw this huge crowd, and he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them, because they were like a sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. You're thinking, quiet place, ruined. Late in the afternoon, his disciples came to him. This is a remote place. In fact, same word translated wilderness. Same exact word. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat. But Jesus looked at them and said, you feed them. That's what I love this. You imagine Jesus saying that to you? You're thinking, what? Come on, you know I can't do that. With what, they asked. They looked around and they said, even if we worked for months, we couldn't earn enough money to buy food for all these people. So he asked the question, well, how much bread do you have? So they went out and they looked. They came back and they reported, we have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. In fact, another story, because there's 4 different gospels, tells it in this way, that they found one boy who had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I don't know about you, that's a serious lunch. For a little kid to be like, all y'all are going to be so hungry, I'm bringing 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish just in case. Like you're thinking, well done, boy. I watch my kids pack their lunch. Nobody's throwing 5 full loaves of bread and 2 fish in their lunch. This kid was hungry. That's what he was. So they took the bread, he gave it, right? And they came back to Jesus. We have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Then Jesus told I just love this. There's 15,000 people listed in this story. One of them brought lunch. One, that would have been my new friend, right? Jesus told the disciples, have everybody sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of 50 and 100. Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he looked up to heaven. He blessed them, and then he broke the loaves into pieces, and he kept giving the bread to his disciples so they could distribute it to the people. He also divided the fish so that everyone can share. And then they all ate as much as they wanted. 15,000 people. And afterwards, the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftover bread and fish. A total of 5,000 men and their families were fed that day. It's interesting to me, when you look at this miracle, you're thinking, what? As he broke it and distributed it to the 12 different friends, disciples, they went out and fed everybody. And at the end of it, they came back and their baskets were still full. Like, this is a complete miracle. This is one of those, like, wonderful provision miracles. Where did the provision take place? In the wilderness. How did it take place? It's because Jesus was there in the wilderness, and he wanted to reveal himself to them. In fact, he used the disciples. He used this boy who had the only one who brought a sack lunch. I love it. And he used them to distribute all of this blessing. All of those people were provided for. There was a rich abundance in the middle of a wilderness, in the middle of a desert. They turn around and he gets all of them back with a full basket of everything. This is a really cool miracle. In fact, John 6:14 records it with this. At the end of this, the disciples look at Jesus and they say this. When the people saw Jesus do this miraculous sign, they explained, surely he is a prophet. I would think, like when I step back and look at it, like, yeah, prophet, that's great. But they actually missed the point. Because he's not a prophet. He's God. So this whole miracle, everything happens in the middle of the wilderness, all of these things, and they look at it and go, oh man, he must be a really, really cool guy. He must be a great prophet. Must be a super wise man. That was their response to this story. And what we find is that in this story, as it continues to unfold, he's actually trying to take their belief in who he is and change it to who he actually is. Jesus keeps trying to bring them to the wilderness. In fact, he goes out to the wilderness, they find him. He goes back to another place, they find him again, over and over. You see this. What's cool is that biblically and historically, and ironically, wilderness, from a biblical perspective, is always the place in which God richly blesses people with his presence and his provision, but only those who are choosing to seek him in it. I don't know why. And there's a longing inside of each and every one of our hearts for a quiet place, for a wilderness, to be alone. But that's the place in which he meets you. He provides his presence, and he provides for everything that you would need. In fact, it's amazing to see over and over and over again. Exodus 5:1, this is in the Old Testament now. It says, Moses and Aaron went and spoke to Pharaoh. They told him, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me where? In the wilderness. And the moment that they were released and they went out to the wilderness, the Lord revealed himself, and he showed himself, and he explained himself, and they got a new revelation of who he was. In fact, Mark chapter 1, this is how Mark starts the book, is he's talking about John the Baptist, which is a really good friend that Jesus just lost. He starts the book with this. So this is the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. And it began just as the prophet Isaiah had written. Look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you. He will prepare the way. He is the voice shouting where? In the wilderness. Prepare the way of the Lord's coming and clear the road for him. It's interesting, John the Baptist, who's a good friend of Jesus and actually relative and cousin, is in a wilderness calling out to them. There's a prophetic word about this, and what you find over and over and over again is that Jesus would go to the wilderness. He'd go to a quiet place in order to seek the Lord. In fact, right after he's baptized by John the Baptist in Matthew 4:1, it says this, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And over, Jesus had this pattern or this habit or this lifestyle of as soon as life started to get overwhelming, as soon as it started to pick up pace and more people showed up, he would turn around and he would say, I'm leaving. And he would go by himself or he'd go with a very small group and he would go alone. Why? Because there's something about quietness and quieting your soul, and there's something about quieting the noise and the chaos around you in which you can focus. The Lord desires. That's a really nice one. I like that one. I like that. You are excellently proving my point. I love this. I so appreciate. Thank you for doing that. The reality is, the moment you find a quiet place, what happens? It's ruined. I know. So well done. Nailed it. Oh. So Jesus says this, and here's the next one. Mark 6:45. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and head across the lake to Bethsaida. While he sent the people home, right? After telling everybody goodbye, he went up to the hills by himself to pray. And so you find now this is the fourth time in Mark chapter 6 that Jesus is trying to get away from people. He's trying to find a quiet time. The fourth time. He just keeps doing it over and over and over again. I think you and I know exactly what it's like to continue to find a quiet place and then have it ruined. Because Jesus found a quiet place and then all of a sudden bad news showed up. Then he found a quiet place and all his friends showed up. Then he found a quiet place and 15,000 people showed up. And he just keeps finding these quiet places and then something pulls him right out of it. And you and I know exactly what that's like. We know what it's like to find a quiet place and then have it be completely ruined. We live in Central Oregon. This used to be a really quiet place. When we moved here, there was 18,000 people. Quiet people. And then over the years, more and more people come. And the moment you find a quiet place, it's ruined. When I was 13 years old, I used to work down in what we know now as the old mill, when it was just an old mill, and it was a big red building. I used to work for Hooker Creek, and my friend, myself, Nate, and Chad actually used to work down there. We'd wash semi-trucks on Saturdays, and the only thing down there on the river was a big red barn, semi-trucks to wash, and a big old mill that we'd play in. The bottom was actually all completely floated with water, which you could float around on there. Not really cool. We could climb up the stacks. And in fact, right outside of where Red Robin currently is, that's where, at 13 years old, I used to just swim in my underwear by myself with my friends. I can no longer swim there in my underwear, or I won't have friends. That used to be a quiet place. It's a beautiful place. And the moment somebody else found out about that place, they started changing it. And what happened? We lost our quiet place. I did the Green Lakes Trail a couple years back with my son Titus. And we went up, we hiked up on a Friday. We spent the night on the Green Lakes Trail. Beautiful time. It's quiet. Woke up in the morning. We started heading out. And we counted everybody who was passing us on Saturday morning. 243. Yeah, 3 of them had cats on leashes. Yeah. They ruined the quiet place. Over and over again. The moment you find a lake, the moment you find a restaurant that you love, the moment that you find a quiet place in this area, what happens is it's ruined by someone, by your phone, by someone calling. Like I moved from here to Sun River, 5 years ago, and Sun River used to be a quiet place. It's not quiet anymore. And we all know this feeling of searching for a quiet place only to have it ruined, and then search for a quiet place. And it doesn't just happen outside, it happens inside. The moment that you find a quiet place inside is the moment the kids walk in, something happens, something breaks, a neighbor starts something. And the moment we find a quiet place, just like Jesus did, it's ruined. The point, the hope, the encouragement is to never stop looking for the next quiet place. Jesus turned around and he said, let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. In fact, at a point where he's like, all right, well, if it didn't work here by the ocean on a boat, I'm headed for the hills. And he switched up his strategy and he continued to look for a quiet place. It wasn't actually last year, September of last year, I went hunting in Alaska with a friend of mine, just me and him, and it was the last time I found a really nice quiet place. Drove almost to the tip of the earth. It was beautiful. There was no one there. Several hour drive, several hours on a boat to get to the middle of nowhere. It was me and a buddy, and in fact, for 7 days, I didn't see a single plane. I didn't see another boat. I didn't see any other people. It was so beautiful and peaceful. And I'm not going to tell you where it is because it's beautiful and peaceful. But it was great. I got to get back to just being alone outside in my underwear again. It's wonderful. It was just great. Nobody there. You don't know. You can't prove it because you weren't there. But it was peaceful again. It was quiet again. It was one of those like moments where you're like, there it is. I found it. But we actually have to be on the hunt for the quiet place. Because something happens in the quiet place that we don't want to miss and that God doesn't want us to miss. Because it is in solitude, it is in quietness, it is when you can find wilderness in your own life that the Lord richly grants his presence and his provision to all of those who are seeking him. God has something for you this week in the quiet place. The question is, are you going to find it? And the moment you find it, if it's ruined, are you going to find it again? And are you going to continue to pursue that quiet place until you can get all that he has for you? The Lord kept revealing himself in the quiet place over and over and over again. And in fact, the moment he found a quiet place, he was pulled out again. And this is the last story of Mark chapter 6. It says late that night. So he heads up into the hills by himself. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone, finally, on land. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them, walking on the water. What? That's awesome. That's amazing. He's walking on the water, and I love this. He intended to pass them by. That just tells you how awesome he is. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to let him struggle all the way to the other side. I'll meet him there. That's what I'm going to do. I'll just meet him at the end of the struggle. But when they saw him walking on water, they cried out in terror, thinking it was a ghost. Because at first they thought he was a prophet. Now they see him as a ghost. The word's actually translated mirage. And they were terrified when they saw him. So Jesus spoke to them at once, and he said this, don't be afraid. Because they just went from in the middle of a storm to in the middle of terror, and it's different. He said, take courage, I am here. Then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped, and they were totally amazed. For they didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. What? At what point have you been in like a total trial of your own life, in a total storm, blown out to sea? In fact, Matthew communicates this story that they were set right off the shore in a nice, quiet, calm boat. In the middle of the night, the wind picked up and started dragging them, which means by the time they figured out where they were drugged 3 to 4 miles out to sea. This isn't like we were out there trying to hang out by ourselves. No, they were pushed out to sea. He sees them. He's walking by. They're in the middle of the storm. They think they see a ghost, and all of a sudden it's Jesus, and he's walking on the water, which they're thinking, what is happening? He steps into the boat. The wind and the waves calm down. And it's in this moment, for he says this, they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. I'm trying to think to myself, what in the world does a basket of bread have to do with the storm? At what point would you be like, oh, you know what it is? The reason we're in this big storm right now is because we forgot about the bread? Like, where in the world is the connection? Where in the world? Like, why? Why in the middle of this storm is there something I missed in the last storm? Why in the middle of this wilderness, in this solitary place, in this scary place, did I actually miss something that was behind me? And I love this because it's in the first time that he feeds the 5,000 and they look at him and they say, you're prophets. The next time he walks on water, they say, you're a ghost. And it's not until actually at the end of this story when he steps into the boat and the wind is calm that Matthew translates this in 14:32. They actually look at him and say, now we can see that you're the Son of God. Each and every moment, each and every storm, each and every hunger and tragedy led them to a place where they finally could see who he really was. Because in the middle of our storms, We sometimes think, God, you're good. Could you please help? God, you're amazing. God, maybe you're a ghost. Maybe you could help. Maybe you couldn't be here. What could you do? But it's not until you're in the middle of your storm, at the bottom of your dog pile. This is awesome. Guys, I didn't plan this. This just works out so perfectly. I know. Just let them keep coming for all I care. It's proving my point perfectly. It's not until you can actually get into the place of quietness, you can get into a place where you recognize he's trying to reveal himself. And you may have missed it in the last trial. You may have missed it in the last grief and loss and rejection. But there's a point where you're going to have to come to understanding that in the middle of all your tragedy, all your loss, all your grief, all your sadness, all your brokenness, he is God. And he's the only one that will provide for you. He's the only one that will get you out of the mess that you're in. He's the only one that will actually comfort you and love you and see you and notice when you're going from concern to fear. And his desire is to meet you in that quiet place. The question that you have to ask is, are you going to go there? The one thing that keeps getting asked, the big question of Mark chapter 6 over and over and over again really is, who is Jesus? Because when he was in Nazareth, they saw him as simply another person or a citizen, and they lost the miraculous. They lost the faith. A miracle of the 5,000, they said, man, you're an awesome prophet. The miracle of him walking on water, they thought he was a ghost, but it wasn't until all of a sudden all of them clicked to prove the one point. He is God. Because while you're in the middle of your storm, or you're in the middle of a desert, you're in the middle of the wilderness, we have to know who he is in order to be able to understand or be okay with desperation, with desert, and with quietness and with solitude. Because in the middle of your impossibilities, you forget the fact that he's actually creating an opportunity. And you may be sitting here thinking, I'm hungry, but what's actually going on is there's a desire. And instead of pursuing wilderness, we'll find that we try and avoid it. Maybe the point for the disciples was to follow him up the hill into the next quiet place. His heart is to meet you in that place of wilderness and in that place of quietness. The real question for us is, will we continue to search for the quietness? This week, my hope, Rach, if you want to come down, I want to pray as we finish up here. My hope for you this week, my hope for myself this week, is that we would find a quiet place because the Lord desires to reveal himself to you in a fresh way. He desires to provide for you in a miraculous way. He desires to provide for you in your circumstances. He desires to save you. He desires to remove fear from your life. He desires to connect with you and commune with you. He actually wants to hear your stories and he wants to know all about you. But what he's trying to do is get his disciples to a quiet place so that he actually can commune with them. Because the world's fighting for your attention. And we know this. The moment you can find a quiet place, it is ripped from you. The hope this week is that you would get quiet and that you would get with the Lord. Yes, if some of you guys love the outdoors, my encouragement for you this week, go for a walk, go for a drive, go for a hike with a friend. But whatever you do, try and find a place of quietness where you can just listen. He has something for you this week. He has breakthrough, he has resource, he has provision, he has encouragement, and all of these things in store for you, but we've got to find him in that quiet place. Maybe you're not outdoorsy, maybe you love being at home, and the reality is as the weather changes too, we need to find and make habit of going to quiet places at our home. Start a fire, get a cup of coffee, get up before the kids do, or stay up past them. One of the best inventions in my generation was the AirPod Pros because they have noise canceling. They're wonderful. But you got to turn off your phone. You got to turn off the TV. You got to grab the Bible. You got to find yourself in that quiet place. At the moment that the quiet place is ruined for you, don't walk away. Go find a new one. Find a way. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, I wouldn't even know how to pursue God. I wouldn't know how to connect with him. I don't know what you mean by that. Or maybe you find yourself in a quiet place and you're like, he doesn't speak and I don't know what's going on. You've got to silence your soul. And you've got to seek him in that quiet place. Because it's not until you can walk away from all the busyness and all the life and all the pressures and all the pains and all the frustrations and all the broken relationships and the good relationships. And you can't, until you find yourself in that quiet place and you pursue him and you seek him, that's where he will be found. Man, I just wonder, like, if we only knew what he had in store for us this week, if we could find him. Almost as if it's a treasure hunt. To say, where is he? And how do I find quiet? And where do I get there? My encouragement for you this week is to get quiet and then to get with the Lord. He has something amazing for you. But you got to follow him into that quiet. Don't give up. Don't say, listen, I'm a mom and my life's crazy and I'll never find quiet. I'll wait till they move out. Don't do that to yourself. Move them out. You know? Send them to a friend's house. Do whatever you can. Find those moments in the day. Find those moments in the week. And maybe even look at it. Sometimes if you just show up to your weekend and you don't have anything planned and you're trying to figure out how do I rest my soul? How do I do this? You have to think ahead in that. Block the time and then come back and fill the time and find a place to go. Find a place to hide. And once you find that quiet place, don't tell anyone where it is. Because we'll ruin it for you. That's what we will do. But we have got to find him and we've got to seek him in that quiet place. He has a treasure in store for you. I'm going to pray. Lord, we ask this week that you would help us through all the distraction, through all the craziness, through all the news and the kids and school and work and relational pain and grief and sadness and everything that we are experiencing. God, would you help us find those quiet places every day? May we never stop pursuing you in the wilderness. May we not avoid the wilderness because we think it's scary because we're the only ones there, but may we pursue you in those quiet places, unpopulated, uncultivated, quiet places. And Lord, we know that if we seek you and we find you in those places, you will reveal yourself. You will provide, you will rescue, and you will restore. So God, we choose to pursue you this week. Maybe you've never been able to find solitude and quietness in your relationship with the Lord. I want to invite you into that. The Bible says if you repent of your sins and you believe that he, Jesus, came and died on the cross for your sins, he paid the price or your penalty for sin, he makes you right with God. And it's not until you're in right relationship that you can meet him in quietness. So that's where it all starts. It starts with a heart that says, I'm sorry, I did it wrong. Thank you for being my sacrifice for sin. Thanks for paying my penalty and making it right with God. Thank you for making my relationship right with God. And it's when you believe and confess with your mouth and faith that he will be found. So Lord, I pray this week for each and every person who meets you in the quiet place. Would you speak? Would you reveal yourself? Would you bring provision? Would you bring encouragement? Would you do what only you can do? And as we meet you in that place, would you work on our behalf? Would you do the miraculous? Would you heal? Would you provide? And would you save? Would you show yourself not as a prophet and not as a ghost, but as God? May we be in awe of who you are and all that you do. And may we be a people that continually pursue your presence. In Jesus' name.